So a quick talk on Web3 marketing. I'm Amanda Cassatt, founder and CEO of Serotonin. Before that, I was Chief Marketing Officer of ConsenSys between 2016 and 2019, where I built the first Web3 marketing team and helped bring Ethereum to market. Just super quickly, what is marketing in Web3? I think it's actually really different from what that means in Web2 and what in the kind of ideas people come in with about what marketing is from the Web2 world, which is really about connecting projects with users and community members. So figuring out, who would actually use a project if only they knew about it, and being almost like a matcher, like a market maker with those actual projects. Solving the 0 to 1 problem of building your early community. So how do people first find out about your project, and how do they come in and fill out whatever incentive mechanisms you've built into the project? And then over time, you want to decentralize marketing functions to the community. So in Web3, you don't want to have a giant centralized marketing. Is that working? Is this working? Okay, perfect. So you don't want to have a giant centralized marketing team over time. You don't want to hire 1 million people. You want to gradually pass off some of those responsibilities to your community that's incentivized to continue building out what you started. And so this is part of why marketing in Web3 is ideally more sustainable over time, because in Web2, all of your marketing is basically an arbitrage between the cost to acquire a customer and the lifetime customer value. And that arbitrage takes place on third-party platforms, usually like the Google Ads, like the Meta suite, and you build a large centralized marketing team and you control all the messaging and marketing top-down. In Web3, it's really different because the focus often for early stage is on owned and earned marketing, building the actual incentive-aligned community that's going to end up continuing whatever you start building, creating a flexible, lean marketing team, and a lot of bottoms-up community-focused activities. So paying a lot of attention to what your early community is doing and trying to breathe oxygen on those things instead of assuming that you have to come up with every idea yourself like a centralized marketing function would. A lot of the same fundamentals are true between Web2 and Web3 though. And marketing has basically been the same for a long time in terms of knowing your product. So understanding exactly what it is that you are trying to get people to use, understanding what it is that you're building. Oftentimes the person on the team who's doing the marketing work isn't one of the founders or maybe isn't an engineer. And so it's important that that person really get to know how the product works, even if they don't understand every concept down to the atom and bit. Defining a key message. So figuring out exactly what the most resonant thing is about the product to the given audience and making sure to make that match. Identifying the channels where that audience lives. So figuring out what they're actually paying attention to, what their attention knocks up against, and making sure your message lives there. Knowing your audience. So knowing who the people are that you want to be using your product, doing interviews with them, making sure they actually exist. Building a funnel that captures their attention from when they first discover your product through using it, and then measuring the effectiveness of that funnel. And those are true in Web2 and Web3. But one of the biggest things that sets Web3 marketing apart is this idea of community. And people talk about community, people define it in different ways, but I think the simplest way to understand it from kind of a marketing perspective is the incentive-aligned group of people that works together toward the success of a project. And those people can live on a channel like Discord, they can live on a channel like Telegram, but it's not about that channel, it's about the concept that there's a group of people that all want to see a project succeed. And in Web2, you get these categories of builder, investor, and user that are all separate. There are real bright lines between those categories. And in Web3, those categories collapse and combine into this single incentive-aligned thing called community. Because often you get a user who ends up wanting to help build and ends up, contributing to a bug bounty or creating memes. Sometimes you get an investor that decides they want to be a user. Sometimes you get a builder who decides they want to be an investor. Marketing channels. So earlier on, especially in a Web3 startup's journey, you want to focus on owned and earned. Paid comes a little bit later. I'm not going to go through all of these, but it's a good list just to take a picture of all the different activities that you could do. So your own channels are the ones that you control. They're on your website. It's your blog, your email, your social channels. You can put whatever you want on them. Earned, that should say earned, not owned. Earned is you need some kind of third party to endorse what you're doing and to decide that your message should be on their channel. So that's pitching to speak at an event. That's getting in the media. That's certain kinds of content that gets placed in other channels. And then usually later in a startup's journey, you start thinking about paid. And the time to start thinking about paid is when you can really define what the ROI is, because you want to understand that everything that you'd actually pay for is going to bring revenue back in. So you usually have a bit more of a mature product by the time you start doing paid. So paid media, print and digital ads, sponsored content, podcasts, YouTube shows, broadcast, social. Obviously, there's paid on a lot of different channels. Some audiences really don't like being reached by paid, so that's always important to think about your audience and make sure you're not reaching them on a channel that they don't like. I think Web3 community is always good to remember environmental, like physical ads. People forget about the physical world, and then it's so cool when you arrive at DevCon or when you arrive at a major crypto conference, and suddenly there are physical environmental ads everywhere. It's important to not forget, because that actually ends up on Twitter. People will take pictures of something in their environment, and then that'll end up circulating on other channels. This, again, is something to take a picture of because it's way too tiny to go through all of it. But I think it's useful to think about the different stages. So the first place that your potential audience member, potential user meets your product, you can call that discovery. So that's the platform. Maybe it's social media, maybe it's a live event where they first see your brand, and they're going to see your visual and verbal branding. They're going to see your kind of knife's edge key message where you've articulated the value prop of what you've built in the terms that matter most to the potential user. And then if that's an effective brand and if it's an effective message, they're going to convert into the next step, which is starting to engage with that brand. And the goal of the engagement phase is to be able to reach the user again, get them to sign up in a way where you could target them again. So maybe they're following your social channels, maybe they are signing up for your community, maybe they're registering to join an email list, maybe they're just signing up to be notified when a beta is live, but it basically means that you, the brand, the project, get the benefit of being able to contact them again. Then once they're in that engagement holding tank, you can convert them whenever your product is ready or whenever you want to start using your product. And then once they're using your product, you can try to retain them. The journey doesn't end just when they start using your product. One needs to be vigilant about other competing products and make sure that that you're continuing to provide incentives to stick with yours and that you're vigilant of what other projects are offering. So at the different stages of the marketing funnel, you see like CTA there on the left. That stands for call to action. And each of those different catalysts is a call to action that you can measure to make sure that your funnel is actually working. So at that discovery to engagement phase, you can measure how many people are signing up, how many people are registering, joining, connecting their wallet, whatever it is that you want them to do. The next call to action when they're using something, it can be purchase, download, swap, stake, and you can measure how many people do that. And then retaining them or getting them to use new products, there's also in-product marketing, right? Are they clicking, use this new feature? Are they saying, I'll do this again? Are they coming back to your product? When you first start out, you don't want to have all of that stuff, right? Like that's a ton to build out. But from the moment you kind of initiate your project, there are a few things that are really helpful to have. You've got to have your brand and your key message. That doesn't mean it needs to be, a picture perfect, gorgeous, Apple quality brand, but it needs to be something, right? It needs a name, otherwise it's not going to stick in people's minds. It needs some kind of, maybe some colors, maybe a logo, a word mark, just so people can recognize it. You need some kind of marketing strategy. How are you going to get the thing that you've built in the hands of people? You need a website. People need to land somewhere when they hear about your project to go hear more and to start going through the funnel. You need to decide which social and community channels you want to use. You don't need to get all of them, but maybe decide on one that you actually have the capability to staff properly, and you spin that one up. And some content. You're going to need to create some visual, verbal content for your website and for these channels. Again, this is maybe like a thing to take a shot of. This isn't the most perfect, gorgeous, mature company website, but this is kind of an MVP Web3 product website. You really want to think about real estate on the part of the screen before you start scrolling. Basically, you lose people the further down a product website you go. And so your most important key message needs to be on what's called the hero, or what's above the fold, before people start scrolling. So you need your key message, your brand mark, and your call to action text, and some kind of maybe button to do the call to action. And then it's often really useful, and you'll see this a lot, to have some kind of product snapshot so people can see what it's going to be like to use the product. Maybe it conveys the idea that the product is easy to use. Then you'll see there's some, what I would call like a wall of trophies. So logos of things that are using the product already to show someone who's arriving on your site that other companies, other people like them are already using the product. Maybe some testimonials. Then as you scroll, and these are people that are really interested in your product, the more you scroll down, is the how it works, the our team, the stay connected. And again, this is just a super, super general high level one. People think that brands will gradually get attention and get users, but it's actually really jagged. If you look at like actual signups to a community or actual visits to a website, it's really catalyzed by very specific events. So attention is jagged over time. So usually the first event that gets a startup attention is maybe like a fundraise announcement, or maybe a first blog post about, here we are, here's what we're doing. Then you get your first kind of step function growth of attention, traffic, followers. Then there'll be another one, like a major partnership, a product launch, and then you'll get the next one. And then there are other ones, like an earned media feature story about how your product is getting more traction. But it's really very, very lumpy. And you want to put as much focus as you can as a marketer into making sure those moments are executed excellently and that they're actually converting people to come do the thing that you care about. Just going to run through these super quickly, but there are some early stage marketing tips and tricks that we've seen work over and over again at Serotonin, and that some of which I saw work really well when I was at ConsenSys with the companies that we worked with in that context. For visual branding, this is something that we call at Serotonin instant incumbency. Obviously, that's a bit of an oxymoron, but you can, with a visual and verbal brand, basically convey to someone subconsciously that a company has been around a long time, which can convey trust and make people more interested in using a product than they would if something felt very new, very kind of niche and ticky-tacky. So if your audience responds well to trustworthy brands and to ideas about like maturity and trust, then it can be good to make sure your visual brand feels more mature than your startup actually is and is conveying that kind of feeling. A knife's edge message. So when your product does multiple things, we have this all the time. Founders will come because their product does X, Y, and Z, and they want their core branding and messaging to articulate, we do X, Y, and Z. But we always try to winnow that down into a single knife's edge message, which is the single most salient thing about your product, the thing that it solves that's the most useful and the most relevant to your target users. And that wedges open the door so that you get to say more to people. But you usually get to say only one thing, and then you interest them with that one thing, and then you have the opportunity to tell them about all the other features. So this is really hard, especially for founders who've put a lot of thought and effort into having different features. but it really sticks in your mind if you have one thing. Like if you think about Volvo, right? It's the safest car. It might also have a great, horsepower. It might have a great music system, but people can usually remember one thing. Hyperboles are great. Safest, first. So product websites, we saw this quickly on the sample one, but wall of trophies. Don't hide your light under a bushel if there are already a bunch of people or companies using your project. You should broadcast that there are users or that there are companies that are using it, because then when someone arrives on your website, they see a company like the one they would aspire to already on there, they're going to maybe FOMO or maybe realize that they should also be using the same product. If you look at like a DeFi website, you're going to see metrics like TVL on there. That's a kind of wall of trophies, right? It's showing people that there are other people that are willing to trust that protocol with their assets. Constant co-marketing and social proof. So basically, you as the project are a bit limited in what you can say credibly about yourself. Obviously, every project thinks it's great, and you as its founder are going to go on social media, you're going to go to talks and say that your thing is wonderful. It's more believable if you can get other people to say your key messaging about your product. So if you have other partners that are using your product, if you have investors that are backing your project, if you have friends in the industry, if you have people that are incentive aligned with your project, making sure that they are carrying those messages and trying to get those messages in the media, because anyone that's not you and that doesn't work at your project saying the thing you care about is going to carry a lot further. Organic influencer marketing. So in our space, especially early on, it feels really inauthentic to have a bunch of paid influencers, kind of Web 2 style. You think of Web 2 marketing as someone hawking a vitamin water hashtag ad on Instagram, but that doesn't work in Web 3 because it feels really inauthentic, and you want to have people in front of brands and projects that are actually believable as users. And so you want to go organic, especially at the beginning. Figure out who all the people are that already are interested in your project, that already believe in your brand, and organize them in some kind of repeatably leverageable channel to help you get your message out, rather than going to some kind of paid influencer, especially early. Building a niche media brand or community. This is a recommendation we make a lot before your product launches. Let's say your topic is security. Let's say your topic is privacy, but your product hasn't launched. You can build an email newsletter. You can build a community around that topic and create a bunch of content on that topic, which brings people into your brand and helps people discover your brand even before you have a product ready, so that when you actually have your product ready, you have people in that kind of engagement holding tank at that level of the marketing funnel that you can convert to start using it on day one. This is the company that I started after my years as CMO of ConsenSys. It's, I think, the largest Web3 marketing firm. We've worked with a lot of very cool brands in this space, and really excited to meet new startups and chat about what you're building. Thank you so much. We'll take a few questions. Yeah. Right. So not every product has potential users, right? Some products don't, and those products are going to have to pivot or iterate in order to match what there is demand for. But I would say like the DeFi, there is a DeFi community, right? And it's smaller than, for example, like the fintech community. But the fact that it's small doesn't mean it's difficult to reach. It's concentrated, and it lives on very particular channels, which actually makes it in some ways easier to reach and to learn from and see whether they like your product. So DeFi focused sites, DeFi focused conferences. That community is very concentrated in certain places. There are great like DeFi focused YouTube channels. I would say that's a very kind of targetable, repeatable audience, even though it's not as big as others.
What advice would you give to startups in Web3 regarding budgeting for marketing, and how far before launch to start allocating budget to marketing?
Yeah, so I would not have a giant in-house marketing team early on. I would stay pretty lean and flexible. This is for most. Obviously, it's a little bit different depending on what you're doing. I wouldn't put a ton of money into paid campaigns before you can figure out ROI on a paid campaign, like how that actually converts into revenue in. I would focus a lot on building early community through owned and earned channels. If you saw the list of different channels. So I'd focus on building early community through owned and earned, getting feedback from that community about what they like and don't like, and basically activities that someone can do on your team that are kind of OpEx, not CapEx, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Soft launch? Yeah. I mean, you can call things whatever. Like, you can call things an alpha launch, which implies that it's very early. You can call things a beta launch. You can call things a soft launch. Well, it just depends on the ROI, right? Like, if you have the product essentially ready and you're calling it a soft launch because, you're trying to get people excited and they would respond to that in some way, then maybe that makes sense. But if you aren't sure how well that will convert into revenue, for example, I would focus on owned and earned tactics to do that soft launch before you understand what the value of a user is actually going to be. Like, basically, you need to understand what the value is of someone coming in before you pay out a bunch of capital to try to get them to come in. Cool. Thanks, guys.